In this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Usually I talk about the Dance of the Dragons. I've read this story over several times. Obviously it's written from multiple people's different perspectives. So when I'm retelling that story in my videos, I kind of forget certain things. So I realized the best way to sort of tell everyone this story is to fucking read it. So in this video, I'm going to read a few pages of the Dance of Dragons, give my commentary, and talk about what's going to happen in the first season, or at least in the first couple episodes. Now, obviously, if this video does well and you all watching it enjoy it, I'll make more. But for this one, the like goal is going to be 2, so please, if you enjoy this, do me a favor and slap that like. Long night! Now, these quotes are taken directly from Fire and Blood Part 1, and that's obviously written by George R. R. Martin, and it's, history of House Targaryen, which the initial first part of this book takes place 300 years before, the events of A Game of Thrones, which is why HBO put that, little thing that a lot of people were like, what the fuck? Is this going to be like some sort of serialized, jumping around, time-skipping TV show? No, they did that because it's based off of Fire and Blood, and it literally says 300 years before Game of Thrones, dragons ruled Westeros. They just went with that pitch line. But anyway, let's jump right into this motherfucker. So I'm on page 391, and, I'll just read a little bit and stop and give my commentary. We'll do that depending on how long, see how long we can make this video. This is called the Dying of the Dragons, the Blacks and the Greens. Now, the Dance of the Dragons is the flowery name bestowed upon the savage, internecine struggle for the Iron Throne of Westeros, fought between two rival branches of House Targaryen during the years 129 to 131 AC. To characterize the dark, turbulent, bloody doings of this period as a dance strikes us as grotesquely inappropriate. No doubt the phrase originated with some singer. The dying of the dragons would be altogether more fitting. But tradition, time, and Grand Maester Moonkin have burned the more poetic usage into the pages of history. So we must dance along with the rest. So basically, George has a way with words, and you can see that I have a way of mispronouncing words. But basically, that little passage is basically telling you the fact that this is called the Dance of the Dragons, and it's referenced in the main series of Game of Thrones. It's obviously referenced all throughout the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, but the fact that it's called a dance is pretty fucking ridiculous. This was a tragic time. This was everybody thinks, oh, Game of Thrones, backstabbing, twists and turns, War of the Roses. Yes, this is the craziest. How could the plot twist, how could it possibly get any more grotesque than the events that happened in Game of Thrones? Well, when dragons are involved and when everyone's really close together, but they all sort of want the same thing, that's bound to happen. So that's one thing to look forward to this show is it's the amount of treachery and backstabbing and the grotesque deeds are one-upped from in Game of Thrones, in my opinion. Especially since the showrunners are given that freedom, since it's not like we're not given POV for most of the characters. So their creativity is going to run rampant. But continuing on here, there were two principal claimants to the Iron Throne upon the death of King Viserys the First Targaryen. His daughter Rhaenyra, the only surviving child of his first marriage, and Aegon, his eldest son by his second wife. Amidst the chaos and carnage brought on by their rivalry, other would-be kings would stake claims as well, strutting about like mummers on a stage for a fortnight or a moon's turn, only to fall as swiftly as they had arisen. The dance split the 7 kingdoms in 2, as lords, knights, and small folk declared for one side or the other and took up arms against one another. Even House Targaryen itself was divided, with the kith, kin, and children of each of the claimants became embroiled in the fighting. Over the 2 years of struggle, a terrible toll was taken on the great lords of Westeros, together with their bannermen, knights, and small folk. Whilst the dynasty survived, the end of the fighting saw Targaryen power much diminished, and the world's last dragons vastly reduced in number. So just briefly adding my commentary to those two paragraphs, it's setting us up. Basically, there's a lot of pretenders. There's a lot of people in this time that are like, hey, I have a claim to the Iron Throne. This is why. none of that lasts very long. The main thing to realize is that the Seven Kingdoms were split into two, Greens versus the Blacks, both of which Aegon the Second Targaryen and Rhaenyra Targaryen are they have valid claims. That's one thing this show gets to explore with having all of these cast of characters, like so many of them announced all at once. They get to show you all the many different aspects of like what it's like, and you could argue what it's like in actual English history when the English crown was up for grabs. They were all so closely intermingled and everyone's kind of fucking related. There's a valid claim for each party to be heard. But the biggest thing to take away from that passage is that it mentions how the world's last dragons were vastly reduced in number. This war is why the Targaryens have no more dragons. Like, they have a few after this, but they were never as great as the dragons during this time period. And obviously Daenerys' dragons are around now in modern day A Song of Ice and Fire, but we kind of saw what happens to them in Game of Thrones Season 8. So once Winds come out, we'll find out, the true ending to George's story. But anyway, continuing on here. The dance was a war unlike any other ever fought in the long history of the Seven Kingdoms. Though armies marched and met in savage battle, much of the slaughter took place on water, and especially in the air. As dragon fought dragon with tooth and claw and flame, it was a war marked by stealth, murder, and betrayal, as well as a war fought in the shadows and stairwells, council chamber... Jesus, I'm getting so excited. Council chambers and castle yards with knives and lies and poison. Long simmering, the conflict burst into the open on the third day of the third moon of 129 AC when the ailing, bedridden King Viserys the First Targaryen closed his eyes for a nap in the Red Keep of King's Landing and died without waking. His body was discovered by a serving man at the hour of the bat, when it was the king's custom to take a cup of hippocras. The servant ran to inform Queen Alicent, whose apartments were on the floor below the king's. Septon Eustace, writing on these events some years later, points out that the manservant delivered his dire tidings directly to the queen, and her alone, without raising a general alarum, which I'm assuming is like either a misprint or is a medieval word for alarm. Eustace does not believe this was wholly fortuitous. The king's death had been anticipated for some time, he argues, and Queen Alicent and her party, the so-called Greens, had taken care to instruct all of Viserys' guards and the servants in what to do when the day came. Now, the dwarf mushroom suggests a more sinister scenario, whereby Queen Alicent hurried King Viserys on his way with a pinch of poison in his hippocras, which is like I think it's like a laced wine. It's got some psychedelic effects. I don't know what it is in this, in this world. But it may be noted that Mushroom was not in King's Landing the night the king died, but rather on Dragonstone in service with Princess Rhaenyra. And that's one thing, aside from those paragraphs we just read, King Viserys dying, but that's one thing to take of note, is that there are so many different people writing this story from all their different perspectives. Each one of them, whichever party they're with, whichever Septon or Mushroom, who's a court jester, whichever side they're with, they're going to tell the events in a way that make their prospective party look good. So that's another element that adds twists and turns to this that makes the story kind of like, we get to see at least the TV show's version of actual events, and I'm pretty sure the writers are fucking getting excited as shit. But so continuing on here, Queen Alicent went at once to the king's bedchamber, accompanied by Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Once they had confirmed that Viserys was dead, Her Grace ordered his room sealed and placed under guard. The serving man who had found the king's body was taken into custody to make sure and certain he did not spread the tale. Sir Criston returned to the White Sword Tower and sent his brothers of the King's Guard to summon the members of the King's Small Council. It was the hour of the owl. Then as now, the sworn brotherhood of the King's Guard consisted of 7 knights, men of proven loyalty and undoubted prowess, who had taken solemn oaths to devote their lives to defending the king's person and kin. Only 5 of the White Cloaks were in King's Landing at the time of Viserys' death: Sir Criston himself, Sir Eric Cargill, Sir Rickard Thorne, Sir Stephen Darkling, and Sir Willis Fell. Sir Eric Cargill, twin to Sir Eric, and Sir Laurent Mariband, with Princess Rhaenyra on Dragonstone, remained unaware and uninvolved as their brothers-in-arms went forth into the night to rouse the members of the small council from their bed. So basically, what the last few paragraphs and then the paragraphs before that I read are basically stating that Alicent moves in silence and violence. Take it from your highness, she's literally telling everybody, yo, the king's dead. It's time to do this shit. And if you listen to what Mushroom says, well, he gave the Alicent poison the king, but there's others that think that Viserys was suffering from some sort of ailment, and the fact that the queen knew he could die at any time, she just wanted to be prepared for in order to put her son into power. Now, obviously, as the story unfolds, you realize that no one is completely innocent. No character is black or white, good or evil, but it just, she looks really fucking guilty by doing this. This is the one thing, since it's like the first thing you hear about, like we don't know what happens with Rhaenyra yet. We're learning the first of Alicent's moves in this war are not the most honorable. Excuse me. I'll try to edit that out. The council convened in the Queen's apartments within Maegor's Holdfast. We've actually seen pictures of what could potentially be Maegor's Holdfast. Now, if Viserys does die early on, which would make sense, according to the leaks. Now, I give a spoiler warning for all these fucking videos, but I feel like if you watch one of my videos, you watch all of my videos. But we've gotten pictures of something what could be Maegor's Holdfast. We've gotten very few pictures of Viserys. That's what makes me think Paddy Considine was there for part of the filming, but his character dies early on, not only in this story, but I'm sure in the adaptation of it. It would only make sense because that's the catalyst that kicks off the events of the Dance of the Dragons. A lot of people are saying they don't know what exact year they'd be starting in, and now that we're doing the flashbacks, I'm pretty sure, at least my speculation, we're going to be starting literally in 129 AC, right when the battle's kicking up, right at Viserys' death, and then we'll get flashbacks because we've gotten Rhaenyra and Queen Alicent's younger actresses announced as going to be series regulars for the first season at least. That means they're going to be doing a fuck ton of flashbacks. So I thought that maybe most of the first episode would be an entire flashback showing you everything that sort of happens. Maybe they can remix the story a little bit and establish greens versus blacks back then. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen, but I'm just saying they could do something like that. And then in the first episode, with the death of Viserys. So Paddy Considine was in the first episode. He could just play, a younger version of how he looks now, and like using the same actor, and then they could end the episode with his death and showing things really fucking kicking off. And they could just keep doing that this whole first season. Maybe they just keep going back and forth a little bit. Now, it is important to note that Dan and Dave were not big fans of flashbacks. So the fact that Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik and obviously George, they are recreating this story for a different medium, it makes sense that they're sort of like expanding on it. They have to. We're going to get a well laid out version of this, and I think that's what's going to make everyone that's like fans of the original the most happy, because a lot of us felt like the last couple of seasons, regardless of the writing choices, the one thing that I think people unanimously agree on is that it felt rushed, because it actually was. It was meant to be like full, season 7 and season 8 meant to be 10 episode seasons, but we obviously didn't get that. I actually forgot where the fuck I was at this point. Okay. So by far, the council convened in the Queen's apartments within Maegor's Holdfast. That's where I stopped. Okay. Many accounts have come down to us of what was said and done by night. And hang on a second, I gotta go let my cat out. Do that shit. They're always like, "Oh, is it time? Is it time? Are you recording? Let me out." Meow. But yeah, many accounts have come down to us of what was said and done that night By far the most detailed and authoritative of them is Grand Maester Munken's The Dance of the Dragons, a true telling, though Munken's exhaustive history was not written until a generation later and drew on many different sorts of materials, including Maester's chronicles, memoirs, stewards' records, and interviews with 147 surviving witnesses to the great events of these times. His account of the inner workings of the court relies upon the confessions of Grand Maester Orwell as set down before his execution. Unlike Mushroom and Septon Eustace, whose versions derive from rumors, hearsay, and family legend, the Grand Maester was present at the meeting and took part in the council's deliberations and decisions, though it must be recognized that at the time he wrote, Orwell was most anxious to show himself in a favorable light and absolve himself of any blame for what was to follow. Munken's true telling therefore paints his predecessor in perhaps too favorable a light. Gathering in the Queen's chambers, this is where the story picks back up. Now, basically, that last passage is just, it's pretty obvious, self-explanatory. It's saying, like, you cannot trust the unreliable narrator, which is like one of the most heavily repeated themes in all of George's novels. Unreliable narrator. If you're a fan of history like myself, and I pretty much think George is a fucking historian, you know that the side or everything that you're reading about, whatever it is, a battle, some sort of an overtaking or an overthrowing over a civilization, some sort of crazy turning point in like Rome's governmental history or whatever, you know, the part that you're reading is written by the person who survived it, the victor, the person who either benefited from it or, you know, is manipulated in some sort of way to make their side look like the victor. So obviously that's what that last passage was just saying. We don't know what went down. What we do know is that not everything that you hear can just be believed just because some old fucking dude wrote it down in a book long time ago. Gathering in the Queen's chambers as the body of her lord husband grew cold above where Queen Alicent herself, her father, Sir Otto Hightower, handed the king Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, Grand Maester Orwell, Lord Lyman Beesbury, Master of Coin, a man of 80, Jesus, Sir Tywin Lannister, Master of Ships, brother to the Lord of Casterly Rock, Larry Strong, called Larry's Clubfoot, the Lord of Harrenhal, Master of Whisperers, and Lord Jasper Wilde, called Ironrod, Master of Laws. Grand Maester Munken dubs this gathering the Green Council in his true telling. Self-explanatory. Don't need to mention, obviously we know what the fuck. Grand Maester Orwell opened the meeting by reviewing the customary tasks and procedures required at the death of a king. He said Septon Eustace should be summoned to perform the last rites and pray for the king's soul. A raven needs to be sent to Dragonstone at once to inform Princess Rhaenyra of her father's passing. Mayhaps Her Grace the Queen would care to write the message so as to often these sad tidings with some words of condolence. The bells are always rung to announce the death of a king. Someone should see to that, and of course we must begin to make our preparations for Queen Rhaenyra's coronation. Sir Otto Hightower cut him off. All this, I'll try to do a voice of what I think this dude would sound like. This is my Sir Otto Hightower. Oh, this must needs wait, he declared, until the question of succession is settled. As the king's hand, he was empowered to speak with the king's voice, even to sit the Iron Throne in the king's absence. Viserys had granted him the authority to rule over the seven kingdoms, and until such time as our new king is crowned, that rule would continue. So basically, that last passage is telling you, Grand Maester Orwell is like, look, this is what we need to do. We need to do the right thing. Let's continue with procedure. Let's send a message to Rhaenyra, tell her father passed away. Alicent, maybe you should be the one to write the message because it's obviously your husband. That would probably be the best thing to do, and let's go ahead and proceed with Rhaenyra's coronation. And then Sir Otto Hightower steps in, and he's like, hold the fuck up, bro. Nah, we're not doing that. And he has the power to do so because he's the hand of the king. We saw that with Tyrion in season 2 of Game of Thrones, where he's basically ruling in his father's stead. We saw that with Ned in season 1, where he's ruling in Robert's stead, and he's trying to make sure that everyone knows that Cersei's children are illegitimate. That's basically what's happening. Until our new queen is crowned, someone said in Grandmaster Moonkin's account. The words are Orwell's spoken softly, no more than a quibble. But Mushroom and Septon Eustace insist it was Lord Beesbury who spoke up in a waspish tone. King, insisted Queen Alicent, the Iron Throne by rights must pass to his Grace's eldest true-born son. The decision that followed lasted nigh until dawn, Grandmaster Moonkin tells us. Mushroom and Septon Eustace concur. In their accounts, only Lord Beesbury spoke on behalf of Princess Rhaenyra, the ancient master of coin who had served King Viserys for the majority of his reign. And his grandfather, Jaehaerys, the old king before him, reminded the council that Rhaenyra was older than her brothers and had more Targaryen blood than the late king had chosen has chosen her as his successor, that he had repeatedly refused to alter this succession despite the pleadings of Queen Alicent and her greens, that hundreds of lords and landed knights had done obeisance to the princess in 105 AC and swore solemn oaths to defend her rights. Grandmaster Orwell's accounts differs only in that he puts many of these arguments into his own mouth rather than Beesbury's, but subsequent events suggest that that was not so, as we shall. And I feel like I'm sort of breaking down stuff that doesn't need to be broken down, so I'll just continue on. But these words fell on ears made of stone. Sir Tywin pointed out that many of the lords who had sworn to defend the succession of Princess Rhaenyra were long dead. It had been 24 years, he said. I myself swore no such oath. I was a child at the time. Ironrod, the master of laws, cited the Great Council of 101 and the old king's choice of Balon rather than Rhaenys in 92. Then discoursed at length about Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters and the hallowed Andal tradition wherein the rights of a true-born son always come before the rights of a mere daughter. Sir Otto reminded them that Rhaenyra's husband was none other than Prince Daemon, and we all know that one's nature, make no mistake, should Rhaenyra ever sit the throne, it would be Lord Fleabottom who rules us, a king consort as cruel and unforgiving as Maegor ever was. My own head will be cut off first, I do not doubt, but your queen, my daughter, will soon follow. And that seems like a good part to wrap this up. I've never made one of these book commentary videos, and I do know that you got to be careful with how much you read directly from the books without breaking it down, because obviously you're just plagiarizing content. So I know that's where it gets juicy, and that's where you realize Sir Otto fucking hates Daemon. But I've talked about the events of this story in great detail over the past coming up on 2 years. So if you want more, well, let me know down below and I'll make a part 2. I only read a few pages, but I think this is sort of the best way to tell the story. Just sort of reiterating what that last passage was just saying is that basically Sir Otto is kind of justified in saying that, we should crown his grandson, Queen Alicent's son, Aegon the First. Or why do I keep fucking saying that? He is not Aegon the First. He's Aegon the Second. They should crown him because that was a tradition that stemmed back to Aegon the Conqueror. And if they don't do that, well then, you're sort of breaking with tradition. And that does kind of have a point because, like he says, it goes back even further, where a firstborn daughter does not overtake precedence of a legitimate male heir at any age. And that's sort of his point. And to go along with that, he's saying that no one in that council, everyone in that small council, can agree that Prince Daemon is a douchebag. And that's interesting. And I'm sure I'll eventually cover that if I do another one of these videos. But basically, Prince Daemon is put on that small council at one point and fucking gets bored. and then sort of removes himself and goes and does his own thing. So no one on that small council sort of likes Daemon. So Sir Otto is like much like Tywin and Tyrion, sort of, where he's like, no, you can't. If Rhaenyra sits the Iron Throne, we all know it's going to be her husband, Prince Daemon, who's the Lord of Flea Bottom. He's fucking scum. He's more cruel than Maegor the Cruel. Is what he's saying. And we can't fucking have that. And it's I guess I'll end it here, but it's ironic that he says that Daemon is as cruel as Maegor the Cruel, because Aegon the fucking second is sick. This dude jacks off to people getting it on, or gets off on the, oh man, it's so crazy. This story gets intense. But if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed my rambling, if you enjoyed my readings, leave me a like down below. The like goal is going to be 2. Super special shout out to every single person who watched this video, and a special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHunsReviews. Again, I want to thank you all so much for watching this. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts, making content throughout the wait for House of the Dragon Season 1, or as it's known on this channel, The Long Night Reviews. Ooh.